Greetings, everyone, and welcome once more to Dracovin Empire. Are you ready to dive back into the world of darkness? I hope you are today, because we're learning about a tribe of Werewolf The Apocalypse. A tribe that's dead, but not forgotten. Yes, we're diving into the White Howlers. Those that begat the Black Spiral Dancers. If you're ready, I am your host and guide here, Countess Dracovin. I can lead you through a gateway through the gauntlet, to the world of darkness, through time and space. We'll learn about the White Howlers before their fall. Perhaps another direction that could have happened, some things that may have happened, and perhaps a little bit of legacy left behind, more than just the beasts and black spirits. Do remember to give me a little bit of tip before we leave, with over on the YouTube side of things. Make sure you're subscribed and letting me know, what do you think about this? Is there a way that you'd use White Howlers in your modern day? Whether a remaining little speck of blood, or perhaps a bit of redemption for something remaining from them. We'll see. The gate awaits. Let's go. World of Darkness has once again beckoned us into their grasp. So the White Howlers. If I were to learn about them, dive deeper into them, get more information, deeper stories than those that I tell you here, well, there are sources beyond this. And they make different stories. Certainly speaking, between the two editions, from C20 to the earlier editions, White Howlers and their fall are depicted a little different. There are some similarities, but certainly speaking, the exact origin of it and how deeply they were driving themselves into are a little bit of questioning. Other books, of course, I would certainly recommend the book that talks about their successor, Book of the Wyrm. Talks about the Black Spirals. But there is indeed one other book I could recommend. The White Howler Tribe book. There is one. So you can learn all about them there. One of 16 tribes of Garrow, and their fall. The White Howlers. As I said, they were a member of the Garrow Nation. One of those 16 tribes. Their kinfolk was from the British Isles. They were the Picts, from the northern British Isles, from the area of Scotland. That's where they originally descended from. Again, it's one of those things, is the evolution of the Picts came alongside them. The people of that region were their kinfolk, they became the Picts, therefore the White Howlers and their human side of things were the Picts. Their totem was the lion. And again, White Howlers were a powerful member of the Garrow Nation. But we can look at their story, their history, in a lot of ways, what led to their downfall. So, the White Howlers were a Garrow of Caledonia. This is an area of modern Scotland, and they'd been there since the Pliocene. They'd been connected with the native wolves, and the basically hunter and tribe of humans there. They are known to have participated in the Empyrean, but they were also known to have abandoned that of their own volition, no less, which is an interesting thing that they walked away from the Empyrean on their own. They did fight against some intrusions of the Wyrm, but the fact is, the region they were in meant that they had very little contact with other Garrow. The Great Winter, Ice Age, changed all of that. The Ice Age of the Pliocene, basically, what happened to cause it, their stories and their tribes, spirit pacts between the tribe and the Karna of Winter that went awry, Vagabond kinfolk families aligned with Wyrm to creep into them and places of the earth, various stories that basically ice was used to cleanse things, but many kinfolk families succumbed to the cold, and those that survived went southward. The great wolves of the region remained. And so, during this time, the White Howlers split. Those that were more deeply connected with the human families and the human kinfolk followed them, and those that were more deeply connected with the lupine kinfolk stayed behind and hunted with them. This is the first time the White Howlers had encountered other Garrow, the Fianna. And I'm not saying this is like, the primordial other Garrow. This is, from the original split apart from the Garrow to the different regions that they came from, This is the first time we're re-meeting them. There were cultural differences, and the plight of kin set Garrow against Garrow for a number of years, hundreds of them. But againstly, they carefully agreed to a breeding alliance. The Howlers remained wary, but Fiona made alliances with fairies, spirit-like creatures that, kind of made things a little bit weird. It's like, you're making deals with fairies. That's kind of a little strange. This is when the White Howlers became part of the Gower Nation. And they learned of the other tribes, too. And Get Fendris, Silverfangs were the ones that they began to get contact with. So now, though, this is them being kind of off in a corner, on their own, thousands of years, and now being like, oh, hey, there's other people around that have been living? Cool, great, neat. When the Ice Age ended, they returned to Caledonia. They reunited with the cousins that had remained there, never left the land. And, it was this kind of combining together that formed a lot of the basis of what the White Howlers were. Those that had become a little bit more feral, with those that had learned a bit more innovations from those from the time in the South. Animal husbandry and farming. The culture grew with this. We go through in time. Romans arrive. Now, again, I'm going to talk about this one because this is more directly hit to the W20 version of the story, and we'll probably have a little bit of difference if you go check out my Black Spiral Dancer video. Again, there are multiple stories on how they necessarily fell, but they did fall, and it did involve them getting into a battle with the Romans. Cool. So there are some common grounds here on why they fell, but the exact details of it. Basically, Romans showed up, did a lot of horrible crap. Howlers became angry. This also stirred worm beasts that began to attack the tribe. Roman Fomori arrived, and so the tribal council basically marched south to the heart of the invaders. They had some resistance from the Romans, but they stormed the headquarters and were victorious. Rushing to war, their families were defenseless. Their holy glades defiled by Banes, their kinfolks harassed and violated by Fomori, their bloodlines tainted by the Wyrm. And so they began to battle against that, slaughter off this kind of taint that came in their wake. Then they discovered the Great Pit, the portal to Malfessus, the domain of the Wyrm itself. Again, this is kind of a little different from the Black Spiral thing of, they were testing the pit before, using it a little bit for training and stuff like that. But in this version of the story, they wanted to close the pit, or take note. They chose to assault the Wyrm directly. They're it's a pit to Malfessus. We can take on the Wyrm. Or weaken enough to secure their homeland, weaken it to drive it back. They called for aid from the rest of the Gower Nation. No answers. Happened both ways. And then they just went into the pit and tried to fight against the Wyrm. And instead were corrupted and went into the Black Spiral Labyrinth and became Black Spiral Dancers. And as of 200 BCE, the White Howlers went extinct. So again, both stories are very interesting. Both involve the Romans showing up and effing stuff up. And, them calling for aid, it not happening. But the question being, in this version of the story, they weren't tempting corruption already, but it still was their hubris in a lot of ways that led to their downfall. Both stories are very interesting, and I did want to tell them separately between the two versions of this video, from the Black Spiral or the White Howler. So it's up to you which direction you want to take. I kind of feel like both have a similar tale, but in ways I enjoy the version of it that's more in W20. But again, it feels almost more logical that they were already tempting fate, because that feels just stupid. We were already going down there and checking things out. Don't worry about it. It's totally not corrupting us slowly and surely from the inside. Wink, wink. That's one of my favorite images of White Howler from W20. It's a very good picture of how they looked. So they organized themselves after the clans of their kinfolk. Basically, this was a result of the separation between the Hameds and the Lupines, and regaining their wolf kin. They were part of this diverse people that were the Picts. They lived alongside the farmers, the hunters, the herders. Some focused on with the wolves. There were tribal councils that were formed. They coordinated the war effort. They had some organization, more than just being small tribes of Garrow connected with these people and the various creatures in the land. In their culture, there are three main camps to talk about, too, which is important. The Bodaria, the Mactree, and the Totes. The Bodaria were the silent ones. They focused on calming the denizens of the Dark Umbra and maintaining a link to the ancestors. Most of them sacrificed parts of their body to come closer to the realm of the dead. The Mactree were focused on the lupine part of heritage. They were close to the Red Talons, but they didn't have the same zeal as Red Talons. The Mactree could be seen as the members that stayed behind during the Ice Age. And then the Totates were basically loose affiliation of White Howlers that were dedicated to preserving their human kinfolk. The Totates were basically like, hey, you know, our humans, we have to make sure they, like, kind of exist too, you know? So there was, like, basically two camps were like, watch after the humans, watch after the wolves, and then the ones that were like, hey, we're not watching after both of them, we're watching after and making sure we're connected with our ancestors. Culturally, blue war paint, tattoos, and body art were very important to the White Howlers. And this is stuff that was sometimes shared with their kin. Again, you have to remember, this is one of those things about a lot of werewolf cultures. They aren't based on that culture. They evolved alongside a lot of these local cultures. Basically living alongside them for thousands of years, influencing each other. That's the way it's supposed to be. Cough, cough, baby. Now, White Howlers did have a long history of cooperating with wraiths, aiding them in finding final rest. Go see the Bodaria. In their burial rites, however, the body of the fallen did not play a significant role. The spiritual self had left the moment of its death. So the spirit's important, but the body isn't to the White Howler culture. Now again, I briefly want to talk about, and if you haven't seen my Black Spiral Dancer video, I do recommend that, but there is a little bit of a difference in the way that they are presented here too. I'm presenting the 20th anniversary version of it more than things. That stuff that's in the White Howler tribe book and how their fall was. Second edition and earlier, basically, it fell into some kind of combination of them being corrupted as well of challenges of the Spiral Labyrinth and the kinfolk being corrupted by Banes and, you know, still fighting for freedom, but this corruption basically allowing the Wyrm to eventually kind of getting into them and, you know, eventually basically challenging as much of the labyrinth as they could, the final members being drugged into the labyrinth. 20th anniversary is more like, instead of like this slow idiocy, it's their own hubris. We're gonna fight the Wyrm. We can totally do it. Go down into the pit. This is a great idea. Again, I kind of talked about this a little earlier, but I feel like both are interesting looks at it, and there might be like some story in between the two. But the sheer fact is that, yeah, they've fallen. Again, it's felt like the original inspiration is not necessarily a great source for this, for the White Howlers. I'll keep that in mind too. Keep that in mind that a lot of inspiration for sometimes some of these werewolf tribes aren't necessarily the best, you know, looking at this. Robert E. Howard had some pulp stories about the pits, and some of their warriors being able to transform into wolves in some of his stories. Robert E. Howard, if you do not know, wrote books in the early 19th century and did the Tarzan books. They are not pleasant in their depiction of many things. So I don't think it's a great depiction there. But the core aspect of the idea about it, of the wolves with picks, isn't necessarily a terrible idea. And again, that cultural area is an interesting area to explore. And I think that's kind of one of those things is why I'm always a little up in arms about the way W5 kind of threw things under the bus. Because, again, there's a lot of good ideas in their different groups, especially these ancient cultures that werewolves are deeply connected to. Because the fact is, they grew up and grew into the various tribes in these regions. Then yes, they are going to be connected with the cultures that are in these regions. That logically makes sense. I'm the werewolves from this region. This is the culture we developed, kind of matching a mixture of our own basic Garu culture and the local culture as it is. The influence of humanity. That's one of those important things. And completely forgetting that feels kind of like a kick in the butt. Granted, there definitely can be some, as I said with this time, we kind of understand probably where the influence for the idea about this came in back in 93 when they were first introduced. Again, that's 93. That is over 30 years ago that they were introduced. Different world. So you can see, if they're drawing back even farther in time, again, we can look at it and make our good stories and directions based on our modern ideas. And I think that's what W20 did a good job of doing, was updating things and still respecting kind of those origin points for a lot of things. And this is my complaint about W5 a lot of times. They don't do that. And the White Howlers are such a fascinating group because they are ultimately the villains of Werewolf. Not as their White Howler incarnation, but because they become the Black Spirals. And the story of their fall, and honestly speaking, again, it being their own hubris is such a better story than them being complete idiots and basically tempting things into stuff and letting it be a slow corruption of their own idiocy. It feels more like a proper hero's downfall to be hubris rather than corruption from inside. Both are interesting stories in their own way, but again, I think it's up to you which direction you want to take if you're going to use something polite as the White Howlers. And it's not like you could not use them nowadays. Sometimes forgotten kinfolk can by random chance get together and have a kid who's now a White Howler. Or maybe you have a story based on trying to redeem some part of it. Redeem Lion. There are stories to tell related to this. Quests. Returns. Other things. Honestly, you can even make it that they never, fell to the Wyrm and you remove Black Spiral Dancers from your storyline. All are options. And all tell a different tale. But that's why I kind of want to talk about White Howlers on their own thing. Because they still can be used. So, I hope you enjoyed diving into White Howlers and learning all about it. Please check out the rest of my stuff, whether it's over on YouTube or over on Twitch. Hey, make sure to give support properly at those things. So at least a follow over on Twitch, a subscription over on YouTube. All help in the end. Make sure to check out my social media. Check out all the things I do, whether they've been uploaded and they're being currently done on Twitch. That's live plays, like Ball of Adams 12 Wednesdays at 8. Discussing Tabletop Saturdays at 6. Those all end up over there. You can check out old live plays that are archived over on the YouTube side. All the tabletop stuff goes over there. So if you just want to kind of game, hang out, chat about some of these topics, Twitch is great. But YouTube's also nice. Make sure you just leave some comments and go visit them along with that subscription. Alright, I'm going to get going. Maybe do some more recordings, hang out on Twitch more, do some other things. But until the next time, we dive into the world of darkness. Chat about any of these things. I bid all of you out there a deep and one farewell.